The shovel felt offensively cheap in Karen Sterling's hand. Its plastic handle was a lurid toy-like red, and the scoop itself was flimsy aluminum, better suited for a child's sandbox than the Sisyphean task before her. Before her, her chariot, her sanctuary, her pearl-white 2024 Mercedes-Benz S-Class was entombed. Not in concrete, not in mud, but in something far more insulting. A perfectly excavated pit, of course. Golden builder's sand. The sand rose halfway. Up its gleaming doors, the wheels submerged entirely, rendering the $120,000 piece of German engineering as mobile as a pyramid. The midday August sun beat down on the manicured cul-de-sac of Harmony Creek Estates, glinting off the silica trap and searing the back of Karen's neck. Standing on the edge of the pit, on his own immaculately green albeit unapproved shade of green lawn was Alex Ivanov. He was shirtless, his lean torso glistening with sweat, a pair of dusty work boots on his feet. He held a bottle of water, from which he took a long, maddeningly slow sip. Rule 7b, Section 4, Alex said, his voice calm, almost placid. All resident vehicles must be parked on designated paved surfaces. You're on my lawn, Karen, or well, you were. Now you're in my lawn. He gestured with the water bottle towards the shovel in her hand. I figured I'd save you. The HOA fine. This is just community-based enforcement. Karen's knuckles, wrapped around the cheap red plastic, were as white as her car. Her mind, usually a well-organized fortress of bylaws and procedural certainties, was a maelstrom of pure, incandescent rage. How had it come to this? It had all started, as most neighborhood cataclysms do, with something small, something aesthetically displeasing. 3 weeks ago, Alex Ivanov, a graphic designer and sculptor who had the audacity to work from home, had begun what he called his eco-conscious xeriscaping project. To Karen, it was a declaration of war on beige. He had torn up a 10-by-20-foot section of the HOA-mandated St. Augustine grass, the grass every resident was required to maintain at a precise height of 2.5 inches, measured weekly. In its place, he had installed a horrifying tapestry of jagged gray rocks, spiky succulents that looked like alien life forms, and the piece de resistance of his rebellion, a winding river of brilliant sapphire blue recycled glass. It glittered in the sun like a wound in the earth, a gaudy, chaotic scar on the pristine face of Harmony Creek. Karen's first action had been textbook. A polite but firm email, citing Bylaw 1, 2A, subsection 2, alterations to front-facing landscaping, must be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee for approval at least 60 days prior to commencement. She had attached a PDF of the relevant forms. Alex's reply had been a single sentence. Thanks, Karen, I'm good. The dismissal, so casual, so breezy, was like a stone in her shoe. Karen did not like being dismissed. In her previous life, before Harmony Creek, before the quiet emptiness of her 4-bedroom house became her entire world, she was Karen Sterling, senior project manager for a major architectural firm. She managed $100 million builds. She orchestrated armies of contractors, navigated labyrinthine zoning laws, and ensured that every single rivet, every pane of glass, every molecule of concrete was exactly where it was supposed to be, when it was supposed to be there. Her world was one of precision, of rules that created order from chaos. Chaos was the enemy. Chaos was what took her husband, Robert, a man who lived life like a whirlwind, his sudden heart attack a final, shocking act of unpredictability. Now, she managed the 54 homes of Harmony Creek with the same ferocious dedication. It was all she had left to control. The Blue Glass River was chaos in its purest form. Her second step was official. A formal notice of violation, delivered via certified mail, detailing the infraction and levying the initial fine of $50 per day. Alex had signed for the letter she'd watched from her living room window, her binoculars steady and, then proceeded to add a cluster of rust-colored spiky plants near the blue glass. It was a deliberate escalation. He was poking the bear. He didn't seem to understand that he wasn't poking a bear. He was poking a highly organized, deeply aggrieved, and meticulously vengeful hornet's nest. The fines mounted $50, $100, $150. They were now at $1,050. The HOA board, a collection of mostly retired and pliable individuals who were easily swayed by Karen's command of parliamentary procedure, backed her at every turn. Margaret, a woman whose roses were her only personality trait, was her staunchest ally. It's the principle of the thing. Karen, she'd whisper, her voice trembling with vicarious indignation. If we allow the blue glass, what's next? Wind chimes? Gnomes. The conflict reached its apex that morning. Karen was preparing to leave for a crucial HOA board meeting where she planned to propose placing a lien on Alex's property. Was the nuclear option, and she savored the thought of it. As she opened her garage, she saw it. Alex's battered Ford F-150, a vehicle that was an eyesore in its own right, was parked on the street. Its rear bumper, caked in mud and what looked suspiciously like non-native soil, was protruding over the soft, curved edge of her driveway by no more than 6 inches. 6 inches. To a normal person, it was an inconvenience, a minor annoyance. To Karen, it was a tactical maneuver, a flagrant display of disrespect for property lines, for personal space, for the very geometric principles that held civilization together. He was encroaching. He was invading her territory. After weeks of his aesthetic terrorism, this physical incursion was the final straw. A slow, cold fury settled over her. He wanted to play by the rules. Fine. She would show him the rules. She wouldn't ask him to move it. She wouldn't leave a note that would be admitting he had power over her schedule. No, she would employ a strategy of containment. She got into her Mercedes, the engine purring to life with a quiet hum of German efficiency. With the practiced skill of a seasoned valet, she backed out of her garage and turned the wheel sharply. She positioned her car perfectly, bumper to bumper, directly behind his truck, trapping it against the curb. Her car was now blocking the entire width of her own driveway, but that was a secondary concern. The primary objective was achieved. His vehicle was immobilized. He was pinned. Checkmate. She got out, feeling a grim satisfaction. She took a photo with her phone. Documentation was keep-making, sure to capture his license plate and the 6-inch overhang. Then, she pulled out her phone and dialed the number for the towing company the HOA kept on retainer. Yes, I'd like to report an illegally parked vehicle at 12 Willow Creek Lane, she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. It's blocking my driveway, a Ford F-150 license plate. She was rattling off the numbers when she saw movement from Alex's front door. He emerged, not with car keys, but with an expression of profound, almost theatrical contemplation. He looked at his truck. He looked at her gleaming white Mercedes boxing it in. He looked at Karen, standing victoriously on her perfectly manicured lawn, phone pressed to her ear. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile that made the hairs on Karen's arms stand up. It wasn't an angry smile. It was the smile of a man who had just been presented with a fascinating new design challenge. He said nothing. He simply walked to the side of his house, where a small bobcat, a piece of machinery he had absolutely no permit for, she noted mentally, was parked next to a mountain of sand and gravel. He started it up. Karen paused her call with the tow company dispatcher. What do you think you're doing? She called out, her voice sharp. The bobcat roared to life. Just a little landscaping, he yelled back over the engine's diesel chatter. She watched, first with confusion, then with dawning horror. He wasn't going after his truck, he was going after her car. With terrifying speed and precision, the bobcat's bucket began to scoop earth away from around the Mercedes. He was digging a trench, a moat. He worked with an artist's focus, his movements economical and swift. He carved a perfect rectangle in his own lawn, with her car situated in the exact center. The St. Augustine grass she championed was ripped from the earth in great weeping clumps. You're destroying your own property, she shrieked, the sound swallowed by the engine. He just grinned once the pit was deep enough. About 3 feet down, he drove the bobcat over to the sand pile. Bucket by bucket, he began to fill the hole. Sand cascaded around the Mercedes, flowing under the chassis, rising up the tires, burying the finely tuned suspension and the polished chrome rims. It was a methodical, almost serene act of automotive burial. Karen stood frozen, phone in her hand, the dispatcher's tinny voice asking, Ma'am, are you there? She had hung up without realizing it. It took him 20 minutes to excavate, entomb, and strand her. When he was done, he parked the bobcat, killed the engine, and the sudden silence of the cul-de-sac rushed in. He walked over to a pile of tools and picked up the cheap red shovel. He crossed his lawn, stopping at the property line, the border she held so sacred. He held it out to her, and that brought her to now, standing in the oppressive heat, the symbol of her defeat in her hand, staring at her sunken chariot while her neighbor, the agent of chaos, watched her with an unnervingly patient gaze. You're insane, she finally breathed, the words feeling utterly inadequate. You're a maniac. I'm calling the police. I'm having you arrested for destruction of property, vandalism. Alex just shook his head, still holding his water bottle. Your property isn't destroyed, Karen. The arrival of Officer Miller was, for Karen, the first movement in her symphony of retribution. She had called the non-emergency line, her voice a carefully modulated blend of distress and civic duty. She didn't shriek or accuse. She reported a significant property dispute involving unauthorized excavation and potential vehicle damage. She used the calm, professional language that authorities understood. Officer Miller was young, with a face that hadn't yet been hardened by sin, and a weary posture that suggested it soon would be. He ambled up Karen's bluestone walkway, his gaze sweeping over the scene, the sunken Mercedes, the pile of sand, the serene-looking man in the lawn chair across the street. Ma'am, you're Karen Sterling, he asked, his hand resting on his utility belt. I am, Karen said, stepping out of her front door. She had changed out of her meeting attire into a crisp linen pantsuit. It was her armor. Thank you for coming, officer. As you can see, my neighbor, Mr. Ivanov over there, has taken it upon himself to illegally detain my vehicle. Miller sighed, a small puff of air in the humid afternoon. Okay, let me get this straight. You parked your car behind his truck, blocking him in. His truck was illegally encroaching upon my property. It was blocking my driveway, Karen corrected, her tone sharp as broken glass. I took a defensive measure to prevent his departure until a tow truck, which I had called, could arrive to rectify his parking violation. Right, a defensive measure, Miller repeated, looking over at Alex, who gave a small, friendly wave. Miller waved back, a gesture that infuriated Karen, and in response, he dug a hole. He operated heavy machinery without a permit, which is a violation of City Ordinance 34B. He excavated his property without proper shoring or safety signage, creating a public nuisance under Section 18 of our HOA covenants, and he has effectively stolen my car by rendering it immobile. Karen had her points lined up like soldiers on parade. Miller walked to the edge of the pit, peering down at the half-buried car. He kicked a bit of sand with the toe of his boot. Well, ma'am, here's the thing. From a criminal standpoint, it's tricky. He didn't touch your car. He didn't damage your car, far as I can tell. He just moved the ground around it, the ground he owns. That's absurd, Karen sputtered. He's holding my property hostage. Izzy, Miller called across the street. Hey, sir, are you preventing her from getting her car out? Alex stood up from his lawn chair and strolled to the edge of his property. Not at all, officer, he said, his voice resonating. With reasonableness, she's free to remove it any time she likes. I even left her a shovel. He pointed to the red shovel lying forlornly on Karen's lawn. Miller turned back to Karen, his expression one of pained patience. Ma'am, this is a civil matter. A big, weird, sandy civil matter, but a civil matter nonetheless. You blocked him in. He unblocked you in a very creative way. My advice? Hire a tow truck. Maybe two, and then you and your neighbor can sue each other into oblivion. That's what civil court is for. Have a nice day. He tipped his cap, turned, and walked back to his cruiser, leaving Karen standing in the shimmering heat, her meticulously constructed legal argument dissolving like a sandcastle in the tide. The officer's dismissal was a public humiliation, a validation of Alex's chaotic methods. She watched the police car pull away, feeling a fresh wave of rage. The system she believed in, the official channels, had failed her. They had sided with the anarchist. If the official system wouldn't work, she would have to rely on her own. Her first call was to a specialized heavy-duty towing and recovery service. The man on the phone, a gravelly-voiced cynic named Sal, let out a low whistle when she described the situation. So let me get this straight, lady. Your Benz is in a hole, full of sand. That is an accurate, if crude, assessment, Karen said through gritted teeth. Gonna need the rotator. And a vacuum truck. This ain't a standard tow. It's a recovery operation. You're looking at, probably $4,000, minimum. And we ain't liable for any sand in the engine. The exhaust, the undercarriage, the glove compartment, $4,000. The price of her pride. When can you be here? She asked, the words tasting like ash. Be there in 2 hours. Sal grunted and hung up. Her next call was to Margaret. The police were useless. Margaret, utterly useless. They called it a civil matter. No, Margaret gasped. The sound like a punctured tire. But he's a menace. What about your car? A specialized team is on its way. The cost is substantial, Karen said, letting the weight of the word hang in the air. But that's not the point. The point is that Alex Ivanov has declared war on the very foundations of this community. This is no longer about his monstrous garden. It's about his blatant disregard for order, for property, for common decency. I'm convening an emergency board meeting for tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. my house. We need to present a united front. Of course, Karen, we're with you. All the way, Margaret chirped. That blue glass. It's just so aggressive. For the rest of the afternoon, Karen became a prisoner in her own home. She watched from her window as a small crowd of neighbors gathered at a respectful distance, drawn by the bizarre spectacle. They murmured amongst themselves, pointing and taking photos with their phones. She saw Tim from down the street, an accountant she'd once fined for having a visible basketball hoop, trying to suppress a grin. She saw the Hendersons, the HOA president, and his wife, standing with their arms crossed, looking grave and concerned. Their concern, Karen knew, was less for her and more for the potential lawsuits this would generate. The arrival of Sal's recovery team was a spectacle of brute force. A massive cherry-red truck, the rotator, with a crane arm that looked like it could lift a tank, lumbered into the cul-de-sac, followed by a vacuum truck that hummed with industrial power. Sal, a stout man with a beard and a stained baseball cap, directed his team with a series of grunts and hand signals. The process was slow, loud, and deeply humiliating. First, the giant vacuum hose, like the proboscis of some metallic insect, began sucking the sand away from her car. It was a noisy, dusty affair that coated the entire area, including the windows of her house, in a fine film of grit. Alex remained in his chair, watching the proceedings with the detached air of a landowner observing a public works project on his property. Once enough sand was removed, the rotator's massive arms swung into position. Thick, heavy straps were carefully maneuvered under the chassis of the Mercedes. Karen held her breath, watching as her beautiful car, her symbol of success and stability, was hoisted ignominiously into the air, dripping sand from every crevice. It hung there for a moment, suspended between the earth and the sky, a monument to her miscalculation. Then, it was gently, painstakingly, lowered onto the flatbed of a separate tow truck. Sal lumbered over to her front door, a tablet in his hand. "All right, that'll be $4,750. Undercarriage looks okay, but you're gonna want a full diagnostic, and a deep clean. Very deep." Karen paid the bill with a tap of her credit card, her face an unreadable mask. The cost was staggering, but it was fuel. Every dollar was another reason to pursue this to the bitter end. As the trucks pulled away, leaving a gaping sandy pit in Alex's lawn, she saw him finally get up. He walked over to the hole, looked into it, and then looked directly at her window. He nodded slowly, a gesture not of apology, but of acknowledgement. "Your move." The next evening, Karen's dining room was transformed into a war room. The long mahogany table was polished to a high gleam. At its head sat Karen. To her right was Margaret, clutching a file of printed photos of the sandpit. To her left was Bill Henderson, the HOA president, a weary-looking man in his late 60s who just wanted to play golf and avoid litigation. The other two board members, a quiet widow named Eleanor and a retired dentist named Dr. Klein, filled the remaining chairs, looking nervous. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Karen began, her voice resonating with authority. She had laid out folders for everyone, complete with annotated copies of the bylaws and glossy 8x10 prints of the incident. "As you know, we've had an ongoing issue with the resident at 12 Willow Creek Lane, Mr. Ivanov. His unapproved landscaping was merely the opening salvo in what has now become a campaign of targeted harassment and dangerous behavior." She recounted the day's events, framing her decision to block his truck as a necessary act of bylaw enforcement in the face of escalating non-compliance. She presented the sandpit not as a prank, but as a calculated act of aggression, designed to intimidate a board member and undermine the authority of this association. "He held my vehicle hostage," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "He operated dangerous machinery in a residential area. He created a hazardous excavation. He laughed in the face of law enforcement. This man is not just a nonconformist, he is a threat to the safety and stability of Harmony Creek." Bill Henderson sighed, rubbing his temples. "Karen, I saw the whole thing. You parked your car blocking your own driveway to trap his truck. Let's not embellish. What did you expect him to do? Bake you a pie?" "I expected him to obey the rules, Bill," Karen shot back, her composure cracking for a second. "I expected him to move his truck, pay his fines, and remove that god-awful blue glass from his lawn. Instead, he chose anarchy. What are we going to do about it?" "We're already levying fines for the landscaping," Dr. Klein offered meekly. The sign was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Every morning, Karen would draw her blinds to be greeted by her own name, immortalized in elegant, mocking calligraphy above a pit of contraband roses. The Karen Sterling Memorial, sunken garden had become a local landmark. Cars she didn't recognize would slow down as they passed her house, the occupants pointing, and sometimes laughing. The neighborhood she had fought so hard to keep pristine and anonymous had become a tourist attraction, and she was the star exhibit. Her weekly trip to the upscale grocer, the pantry, once a pleasant routine, became a gauntlet of perceived slights. She could feel the whispers as she inspected the avocados for imperfections. Two women in yoga pants, their carts filled with organic kale and kombucha, went silent as she passed the artisan cheese counter, their previous chatter immediately resuming once she was out of earshot. She imagined their conversation. "That's her, the sandpit lady? Can you believe he named the garden after her?" The paranoia was a constant, simmering heat beneath her skin. She found herself checking her reflection in the polished chrome of the freezer doors, half expecting to see a shovel in her hand or sand in her hair. The community, once a placid monolith of beige conformity, had fractured. The battle lines were drawn at the mailboxes and during morning jogs. On one side was Team Karen. It was a small but devoted coalition of the old guard. Margaret, her face a perpetual mask of fierce loyalty, had taken to deadheading her own roses, with a furious passion, as if each snip were a blow against Alex Ivanov. Dr. Klein and his wife would offer Karen tight, supportive smiles, while other longtime residents would give her a knowing nod, a silent acknowledgement that they, too, feared the encroaching tide of individualism. Their support was a comfort, but it was also an echo chamber, reinforcing her conviction that she was a righteous crusader, not an obsessive neighbor. On the other side, a far more vibrant and growing faction, was Team Alex. They were the younger families, the tech workers, the free thinkers who had bought into Harmony Creek for the good schools, not the draconian landscape regulations. For them, Alex was a folk hero. His sunken garden was a beautiful act of defiance, a splash of life in a sea of monotony. And so began the Great Flamingo Uprising. It started with a single, ironic pink flamingo appearing on the lawn of the young lawyer who lived 3 doors down. It was placed just so, peeking out from behind a perfectly trimmed boxwood hedge, its plastic eyes gazing towards Alex's house in solidarity. Karen immediately photographed it and fired off a notice of violation. The next day, 2 more Flamingos had joined the first. By the end of the week, there were 7. A flock of garish pink sentinels mocking Section 14C, lawn ornaments, including but not limited to statues, figurines, and non-fauna-based representations, are strictly prohibited. Soon, other small rebellions sprouted like weeds. A rainbow-colored welcome mat appeared. Someone installed a single, tinkling wind chime that played a maddeningly cheerful tune whenever the breeze picked up. Each new infraction was a tiny paper cut, a deliberate assault on the order Karen had bled for. She sent out violation notices like a machine gun spitting bullets, but it was useless. They were overwhelming her. For every flamingo she cited, 2 more seemed to appear. The residents were treating the HOA fines as a voluntary subscription fee for the privilege of annoying her. Humiliated publicly and thwarted officially, Karen retreated into the cool, controlled environment of her home. Her mission changed. The HOA was a clumsy, blunt instrument. Her new approach would be surgical. She needed to find a violation so undeniable, so far beyond the pale of subjective taste, that it would force the board and the city to act decisively. She needed leverage. She needed secrets. Her office, once a command center for managing HOA business, became an intelligence-gathering hub. She purchased a high-powered digital camera with a telephoto lens and a tripod. She mounted her best pair of birdwatching binoculars, a gift from Robert, who had loved spotting cardinals in the backyard, a stand by her upstairs bedroom window, which offered a perfect unobstructed view of Alex Ivanov's property. She bought a stack of legal pads and began a new document. Surveillance log. Subject A. Ivanov, 12 Willow Creek, LN. Her days took on a new, grim rhythm. 7:15. Subject A emerges, retrieves newspaper, is wearing pajamas with cartoon rocket, ships an indicator of a juvenile mindset, spends 5 minutes watering the memorial garden, seems to be talking to the roses. Note: investigate possibility of mental instability. 11:30. White unmarked van arrives. License plate YXG34T. Driver is male, mid-30s, wearing jeans and a t-shirt for a band called the Screaming Banshees. Delivers 3 long, heavy-looking cardboard tubes and a flat square crate. Subject A signs for them and carries them directly into the garage. He does not open them in plain sight. 14 o'clock to 17 o'clock. Subject remains inside. No visual contact. Possible computer-based work, official story. Or covert activities, likely reality. 21:45. Lights on in garage. A faint, low humming sound is audible. Intermittent. Lasts for 3 to 5 seconds at a time. The light visible under the garage door is not a standard incandescent or fluorescent bulb. It is an intense, brief, blue-white flash. Took photo, see file IMG_4073. But it is blurry. Note: sound and light, consistent with welding. Welding. The word solidified in her mind, heavy and potent. Harmony Creek Estates was zoned R1. Residential. Conducting any form of industrial fabrication was a flagrant violation. This was not a flamingo. This was not a subjective debate about the aesthetic merits of blue glass. This was zoning law. It was fire codes. It was undeclared commercial enterprise. It was the silver bullet she had been searching for. Her obsession intensified. She began to neglect her other HOA duties. Margaret's calls about Mrs. Gable's unapproved new mailbox went to voicemail. She ate her meals off in a simple salad or a can of soup, pat her observation post, her eyes scanning for any new detail. She started to see patterns everywhere. The way Alex always parked his truck to obscure the view of his garage from the street. The way he took his trash out at the last possible minute before pickup, the bins always overflowing with strange, unidentifiable scraps of packing material. The scheduled monthly HOA meeting loomed. It was to be held in the community clubhouse, a sterile beige room that usually smelled of stale coffee. Karen knew it would be a showdown. She prepared for it like a general preparing for battle, assembling a new presentation. This one had no pictures of gardens. It featured blurry telephoto shots of the unmarked van, a log of delivery times, and an audio recording she had made by placing a sensitive microphone against her window pane. A low, rhythmic thumping from across the street. The night of the meeting, the room was packed. It was usually just Karen, the board, and 1 or 2 gav. Tonight, at least 30 people were crammed into the small space. Team Alex was out in force. The young lawyer with the flamingo farm was there, along with a half-dozen other residents Karen recognized as fellow rebels. They stood in the back, their arms crossed, exuding an aura of defiant amusement. Bill Henderson called the meeting to order, his voice strained. First on the agenda, he said, avoiding Karen's gaze, is the ongoing situation at 12 Willow Creek Lane. This was Karen's cue. She strode to the front of the room, her laptop in hand. Thank you, Bill. As some of you know, Mr. Ivanov has chosen to respond to the board's legitimate concerns with mockery and contempt. She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. But I'm not here to talk about his memorial garden. I'm here to talk about a much more serious issue, the flagrant violation of municipal zoning laws and our own covenant against commercial enterprise. She launched into her presentation, her voice crisp and confident. She showed the photos, she played the recording. These are not the activities of a simple graphic designer, she concluded, her eyes sweeping across the room. This is evidence of an undeclared, unlicensed, and potentially hazardous industrial business being run out of a residential garage. I am asking the board to authorize immediate, decisive action. We need to involve city inspectors, the fire marshal, and, if necessary, legal counsel to put a stop to this before something catastrophic happens. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then the lawyer from down the street, a man named David, spoke up from the back. "Karen," he said, his voice deceptively casual, "are you seriously suggesting that because a guy gets some packages and tinkers in his garage at night, we should launch a full-scale municipal invasion of his home?" A few people chuckled. Karen's face tightened. "I am not suggesting, David. I am presenting evidence of a clear pattern of behavior. What you're presenting is a conspiracy theory born out of a personal vendetta," David shot back, taking a step forward. "You didn't like his garden, so you tried to fine him into submission. When that didn't work, you illegally trapped his car, and he responded with what I think is a rather witty and beautiful piece of landscape art. And now, because your feelings are hurt, you've been spying on him, taking pictures like a stalker, and recording him. Frankly, I'm more concerned about your behavior than his." The room erupted. "She's right. Who knows what he's doing in there?" Margaret shouted, her voice shrill. "He's a great neighbor. He helped me jump my car last week, and the week following the disastrous HOA meeting was one of chilling isolation for Karen. The flamingo flock across the street had grown into a veritable colony, a silent, mocking testament to her waning authority. When she retrieved her mail, her neighbors, who once offered polite waves, now found fascinating things to look at on the pavement or in the sky. She was a ghost in her own neighborhood, a specter of bylaws past. The isolation, however, did not breed despair. It distilled her resolve into a hard, sharp point. They had ostracized her, laughed at her, and dismissed her evidence. Fine, she would get evidence they couldn't ignore, and she would do it alone. Her mission was no longer about enforcement. It was about vindication. The first phase was observation. Karen's surveillance, previously a passive activity, now became a focused study of patterns and weaknesses. She documented every time Alex Ivanov left his house. Monday, 9:02 a.m. to 9:37 a.m. Trip to coffee shop, 35 minutes. Tuesday, 2:15 p.m. to 3:45 p.m. Trip to art supply store, 90 minutes. Thursday, 11 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. Extended absence. Destination unknown. 150 minutes. She mapped his property in her mind, identifying the blind spots. A tall row of ficus trees separated his backyard from the neighboring property. The side of his garage, the one facing away from her house, had a small, high window that was often cracked open for ventilation, especially on hot days when he was working. The latch looked old and simple. This would be her point of entry. She planned her infiltration with the same meticulous detail she had once used for $100 million construction projects. She purchased a pair of black gloves, shoes, and a small, sturdy pry bar. She rehearsed the route in her mind out her back door. A swift walk along the rear property line, shielded by the neighbor's hedges. A quick vault over the low decorative fence into Alex's yard, and then to the garage window. She estimated she needed a window of at least 1 hour. She would not rush. She would be a professional. The law, she reasoned, was a system of rules. The rules had failed to protect order, so it was necessary to bend one insignificant rule, trespassing, to enforce the far more important ones regarding zoning and public safety. It was illogical, if legally dubious, trade-off. Her opportunity arrived the following Tuesday. It was a sweltering, hazy afternoon. At 1:58 p.m., she watched Alex emerge from his house. He wasn't in his work clothes. He was wearing a pressed shirt and slacks. He got into his truck and drove away, heading, not towards the local shops, but towards the freeway. He was going into the city. This was it. This was her extended window. Her heart began to hammer, a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. This was real. She took a deep breath, walked to her back door, and slipped on the black gloves. The world outside her home seemed preternaturally loud. The buzz of a cicada sounded like an alarm bell. A dog barking 2 streets over made her jump. She moved quickly, just as she'd planned, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the thick grass. She felt a sickening lurch as she stepped onto Alex's property. The grass felt different, charged with transgression. She reached the side of the garage, her back pressed against the warm stucco, her eyes scanning the street and the neighboring houses. No one. The whole cul-de-sac seemed to be asleep in the afternoon heat. The window was exactly as she'd observed, cracked open a few inches. The old latch was simple. She slid the thin end of the pry bar into the gap and applied gentle, steady pressure. With a sickeningly loud click, the latch gave way. She froze, listening, her ears straining. Nothing. She slid the window open, hoisted herself up, and clumsily tumbled into the humid darkness of the garage, landing on a pile of canvas drop cloths. For a moment, she just crouched there, her senses overwhelmed. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, hot metal, and something sharp and chemical, like turpentine. It was not the smell of a normal suburban garage. It was the smell of industry. Vindication. As her eyes adjusted, the scene came into focus. It was cluttered, but not messy. Tools of every description hung in neat rows on a vast pegboard wall: hammers, wrenches, grinders, and welding torches. On a large workbench, blueprints and sketches were pinned down with magnets. They were complex, filled with measurements and geometric angles. In the center of the garage stood a massive object, easily 10 feet tall, completely shrouded by a heavy dark green canvas tarp. This was her prime target, but first, she needed the paperwork. The irrefutable, black and white proof. She moved to the workbench, her gloved fingers rifling through a stack of papers in a metal inbox, and there it was. A sheaf of invoices. Harris Steel Supply invoice. For Alex Ivanov, Ivanov Sculptural Arts. Praxer Welding Gas and Supply. Invoice for Ivanov Sculptural Arts. Industrial Finishing Solutions. Invoice for Ivanov Sculptural Arts. The name hit her like a physical blow. Ivanov Sculptural Arts. It was a registered business. He wasn't just tinkering. He was operating a commercial enterprise. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, her movements swift and practiced. She photographed every invoice, every shipping manifest. The evidence was damning. This was it. The kill shot. No HOA board could ignore this. The city zoning commission would shut him down in a heartbeat. A triumphant smile touched her lips. But her curiosity gnawed at her. What was he building? What was this massive secret project that he shielded from the world under a tarp? She had to know. The risk was immense. Every extra second she spent in here increased her chances of being caught. But the need to see the monster she was about to slay was overwhelming. She walked to the shrouded object. The canvas was heavy, smelling of dust and oil. She took a corner in her gloved hand and, with a deep breath, pulled it back. The object that was revealed was not what she expected. It wasn't a piece of industrial equipment or some bizarre, illegal machine. It was a sculpture. A breathtaking, magnificent sculpture. It was composed of sweeping sheets of copper and burnished steel, interwoven with rods of bronze that twisted and reached for the sky like the branches of a windswept tree. It was abstract, yet it powerfully evoked a sense of joyful, chaotic energy. It was beautiful. So beautiful it hurt to look at. For a split second, the project manager in her brain, the HOA enforcer, went silent, replaced by something older, something she had long suppressed. It was the part of her that used to appreciate art, that Robert used to coax out of her on their trips to museums. This piece had life. It had soul. Then, the enforcer reasserted control. Beautiful or not, it was irrelevant. It was a massive, unapproved structure, the product of an illegal home business. She raised her phone and began taking pictures, documenting it from every angle. This was the ultimate piece of evidence. The corpus delicti.screeech. The sound of tires on asphalt, just outside. A car door slamming. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. He was back. He was back early. She was trapped. Her mind went white with terror. She dropped the tarp, which fell back into place with a soft whoosh. Her heart hammered against her sternum so hard she thought it would break. She could hear his footsteps on the driveway, the jingle of his keys. There was no time to think. She scrambled back towards the window, her previous stealth forgotten. She knocked over a can of brushes, which clattered loudly on the concrete floor. Shit. She could hear the keys pause at the front door of the house. Had he heard? She didn't wait to find out. She threw herself at the window, adrenaline giving her a strength she didn't know she possessed. She squeezed through the opening, dropping hard onto the grass outside, scraping her knee. She didn't feel the pain. She ran, hunched over, back along the hedge line, her lungs burning. She vaulted her own fence, stumbled across her lawn, and burst through her back door, locking it behind her. She collapsed against the door in her own pristine, silent kitchen, gasping for air, her body trembling uncontrollably. She heard the sound of Alex's front door opening and closing. Then, a moment later, the heavy groan of his garage door rolling up. Karen crept to her living room window, the one that looked out onto the street, and peeked through the blinds. She saw Alex standing in his open garage, looking around. He tilted his head, his brow furrowed. He bent down and picked up the can of brushes she had knocked over. He looked at it for a long moment, then slowly scanned the garage, his gaze finally resting on the high side window. The window she had left wide open. He knew. He didn't know who, but he knew someone had been inside. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, then slowly, deliberately, turned his head and looked directly towards her house. Their eyes didn't meet. She was hidden behind the blinds, but she felt his gaze like a physical touch. A chill went through her that had nothing to do with her home's air, but the fear was quickly being replaced by something else. The exhilarating, intoxicating rush of victory. He could suspect all he wanted. He had no proof, but she did. She pulled out her phone, her hands still shaking, and looked at the pictures she had taken. The invoices with the name Ivanov Sculptural Arts, the blueprints, and the stunning, damning photos of the sculpture itself. It was all there. Her case was perfect, airtight. She had risked everything, and she had won. She was no longer just a disgruntled neighbor. She was an investigator who had uncovered a major zoning violation. She wouldn't be going to the HOA. She wouldn't be going to the local police. For 3 days, she worked with the focused intensity of a prosecutor building a capital case. Her dining room table, the site of her failed HOA war council, was now covered with the fruits of her espionage. She printed the photos and glossed the images of the invoices and the magnificent secret sculpture looking stark and damning under the recessed lighting. She created a professional-grade binder, 3 inches thick, with a clear plastic cover. The title, printed in a severe no-nonsense font, read, Formal Complaint, Unlicensed Commercial Enterprise, and Zoning Violations at 12 Willow Creek Lane. Inside, she had created tabbed sections. Section 1, Photographic Evidence of Industrial Activity. Section 2, Financial Documentation Confirming Commercial Enterprise, Ivanov Sculptural Arts. Section 3, Violation of Harmony Creek Estates Covenant 5A, Commercial Use of Residential Property. Section 4, Violation of City of Harmony Creek Zoning Ordinance 8.142, Prohibition of Light Industrial Fabrication in an R1 zone. It was a masterpiece of organized accusation. On Friday morning, dressed in a charcoal gray power suit, she drove downtown and hand-delivered the binder to the front desk of the City Planning and Zoning Department. The clerk, a young woman with purple-streaked hair, accepted the heavy binder with a bored expression. "It will be reviewed in the order it was received," she droned. "See that it is expedited?" Karen said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "It concerns a matter of public safety." For a week, there was silence. The flamingo colony across the street seemed to multiply. The tension in the cul-de-sac was thick enough to be a physical presence. Karen waited, confident, her secret knowledge of the coming storm a source of grim comfort. Then, on a bright Tuesday morning, it happened. An official city vehicle, a white sedan with the municipal seal on the door, pulled up and parked directly in front of Alex Ivanov's house. A woman in a crisp blouse and sensible shoes got out, holding a clipboard and a familiar-looking 3-inch binder. Karen watched from her observation post, the binoculars feeling cool and powerful in her hands. This was it. The cavalry had arrived. The woman who Karen would later learn was Ms. Jean Albright, a senior enforcement officer, marched up to Alex's door and knocked. Alex answered, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked surprised, then wary, as Ms. Albright gestured with the binder. They spoke for a few moments, their expressions serious. Alex then nodded and led her towards the garage. Karen's heart swelled with triumph. She zoomed in with the binoculars, trying to read their lips through the garage's dusty windows. She saw Ms. Albright walk around the tarp-covered object. Tapping it once, she saw Alex pull back a corner of the tarp. She saw Ms. Albright lean in for a closer look. This was the moment of judgment, the official confirmation of everything she had uncovered. She imagined the citations being written, the stop-work order being issued, the slow, satisfying dismantling of his entire illegal operation. The garage door rolled down. They were inside for 20 minutes. When the door rolled back up, Karen leaned forward, eager to see the verdict on their faces. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. They were smiling, not just polite, professional smiles. Alex was laughing, a look of relief on his face. Ms. Albright was nodding, a genuine warmth in her expression, and she clapped him on the shoulder. Then they both turned and started walking across the street, towards her house. A knot of confusion and dread began to form in Karen's stomach. This was not part of the plan. Why were they coming to her? Why were they smiling? She met them at the door, her face a carefully composed mask of civic concern. "Mrs. Sterling?" Miss Albright asked, though she clearly knew the answer. "Jean Albright, City Planning. Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. May we speak with you for a moment?" "Of course," Karen said, stepping aside to let them into her immaculate foyer. Alex followed, his presence filling her sterile space with the faint, unsettling scent of ozone and metal. He remained silent, his hands tucked into his pockets, his eyes unreadable. "Mrs. Sterling," Ms. Albright began, getting straight to the point. "We've reviewed your complaint. Your documentation is exceptionally thorough." There was an edge to the compliment. However, there seems to be a significant misunderstanding. "A misunderstanding?" Karen repeated, her voice dangerously calm. "The man is running a business from his garage, Ivanov Sculptural Arts. I have the invoices." "Yes, you do," Ms. Albright said, her gaze unwavering, "and the city is his primary client. The city is well aware of Mr. Ivanov's work. In fact, we commissioned it 6 months ago after his proposal won a highly competitive public arts competition." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Karen's feet. "You commissioned it?" "That's correct," Albright continued, her voice all business. "The work in his garage is the new centerpiece for the expansion of the City Veterans Memorial Park. It's a major municipal project, fully permitted, fully approved. The residential address was cleared for fabrication due to the unique nature of the project and Mr. Ivanov's need for a secure, private workspace." Karen felt the blood drain from her face. Veterans Memorial Park. The words echoed in the silent hall. But Ms. Albright was not finished. She seemed to feel a certain professional obligation to deliver the final, devastating blow. Part of the commission process for a memorial piece involves community engagement. We wanted the sculpture to honor not just veterans in general, but the spirit of our own local heroes. We provided Mr. Ivanov with a list of potential candidates for inspiration, notable service members from Harmony Creek's history. His final proposal, the one we all felt was the most powerful and moving, drew its primary inspiration from the life and service record of one man in particular, a man known for his courage, his leadership, and his irrepressible spirit. Captain Robert Sterling. Robert, the name, his name, spoken in this context, did not register at first. It was just a sound. Then, the sound connected to a face, a memory, a gaping hole in her life. The binoculars she'd used to spy on Alex had been a gift from him. The house she was protecting was the one he had loved. The order she was enforcing was the antithesis of his entire being. The sculpture, the twisting, soaring, chaotic, joyful sculpture, it wasn't a monster. It was a portrait of her husband's soul, and she had tried to kill it. Mrs. Sterling, are you all right? Ms. Albright's voice seemed to come from a great distance. Karen couldn't answer. She could only stare at Alex. He finally met her gaze, and in his eyes she saw no triumph, no malice. Just a deep, profound, and unbearable pity. That was the look that finally broke her. She mumbled something incoherent, turned, and fled up the stairs, leaving them standing in her foyer. She slammed her bedroom door and collapsed onto the floor, the perfect beige carpet, suddenly feeling like quicksand. The sound of the front door closing downstairs was the sound of her world ending. The carefully constructed fortress of her life, built from rules and regulations, had been obliterated by a single, undeniable truth. Every action she had taken over the past months replayed in her mind, now cast in the horrific glow of this new reality. Her complaints, the fines, the sandpit, the spying, the trespassing, the triumphant dossier was a meticulous, obsessive campaign to sabotage a memorial to her own husband. The public shame was a fire that consumed her. The news would be everywhere. She hadn't just been a difficult neighbor. She was a monster. A widow who, in her madness, had tried to desecrate the memory of her own heroic husband. She lay on the floor for hours as the sun set, the darkness in the room mirroring the abyss that had opened inside her. The grief she had held at bay for 3 years, the raw, chaotic pain of losing Robert, finally broke through the dam of her control. It came in a tidal wave, and she was powerless to stop it. She sobbed, great, heaving, ugly sobs that tore from her throat. She wept for Robert. She wept for the woman she had once been, and she wept for the hollow, bitter creature she had become. When the tears finally subsided, there was only a vast, aching emptiness. In that emptiness, something new began to stir. A flicker of understanding. She had fought against Alex's chaos because she had been terrified of the chaos within herself. His blue glass river, his spiky plants, his beautiful, soaring sculpture, they were all reminders of the vibrant, unpredictable life she had lost and feared she could never reclaim. Slowly, stiffly, she rose. She went to the back of her walk-in closet, to a large wooden chest she had not opened since the funeral. Inside were Robert's things, not the formal dress uniform she kept in a display case, but the real Robert, worn-out sweatshirts, a goofy fishing hat, and a box of old photographs. She lifted out a small silver frame. It was a picture of him on a friend's sailboat, taken on a day he'd skipped out on some formal dinner she'd insisted they attend. He was laughing, his head thrown back, the wind whipping his hair into a mess, the sun on his face. He was the picture of joyful, defiant life. He was everything the sculpture was trying to be. With the resolve that came from the depths of her brokenness, she knew what she had to do. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She walked downstairs, out her front door, and across the street that had been her battlefield. The flamingos seemed to watch her, their plastic eyes no longer. The garage, once a forbidden territory she had infiltrated like a thief, was now a quiet sanctuary. Karen stood before the sculpture, her hands clasped behind her back. Seeing it for the first time without the distorting filter of her rage, Alex had invited her in 2 days after her wordless offering of the photograph, a simple, you should see it properly, extended over the fence. It was more magnificent up close. She could see the fine texture of the metals, the precise, masterful welds that joined chaotic shapes into a harmonious whole. It soared, it twisted, it laughed. It was Robert, the way you described him, Alex said. His voice soft, was as a project manager's nightmare, always coloring outside the lines. But the service records, they showed a different kind of order, the kind you find in a storm. Powerful, unpredictable, but always directed. He called it embracing the chaos, Karen whispered, reaching out to touch a curved piece of copper that looked like a wave cresting. The metal was cool and smooth. I spent our entire marriage trying to tidy it up. Over the next few weeks, a strange and tentative partnership formed. Karen would bring over cups of tea and old photo albums. Alex would ask questions as he worked on the final finishing touches, grinding and polishing the metals to a lustrous sheen. "This photo you gave me," he said one afternoon, pointing to the picture of Robert on the sailboat. His smile, "It's not just happy, there's mischief in it. Was he always like that?" A genuine smile touched Karen's lips for the first time in what felt like years. Always, the first time I met him, he tried to convince me that stripes and plaid were a bold new fashion statement. I spent 20 minutes lecturing him on complementary colors. He asked me to marry him a week later. He said he needed someone to keep his world from spinning off its axis, and you needed him to give your world an axis to spin on, Alex finished, his insight startlingly accurate. She nodded, a lump forming in her throat. Talking about Robert this way, not as the stoic hero in the display case, but as the messy, vibrant man she loved, was a painful, necessary catharsis. She was excavating her own heart, and with Alex's help, she was finding not just grief, but joy. Her public reckoning came a week before the statue's unveiling. The HOA board had, as expected, called a special meeting to discuss her conduct, unbecoming a board member, but Karen acted first. She walked into the clubhouse, the same room where she had been shouted down, and stood before the assembled residents. She looked different. The severe suits were gone, replaced by a simple dress. Her face was softer, the hard lines of certainty erased. She didn't wait for Bill Henderson to speak. I have tendered my resignation from the board, effective immediately, she announced, her voice quiet but clear, carrying through the stunned silence. For a long time, she said, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her neighbors, over Margaret's shocked expression, and David the lawyer's curious stare, I believed that my role here was to protect our community by enforcing the letter of the law. I believed that order, uniformity, and adherence to the rules were the only things that gave this place value and kept the chaos at bay. She paused, taking a breath. I was wrong. A neighborhood isn't built on the thickness of its rulebook. It's built on the people within it. It's built on grace, on understanding, and on the courage to sometimes color outside the lines. She glanced towards the back, where a few pink flamingos were still defiantly planted in the clubhouse flower bed. A true community isn't about the absence of chaos. It's about how we navigate it together. I failed to see that, and for the damage my blindness caused, I am truly sorry. She placed her keys to the clubhouse on the podium and walked out, leaving a room full of speechless neighbors behind her. The day of the unveiling was bright and cloudless. The entire town, it seemed, had gathered at the newly expanded Veterans Memorial Park. The sculpture stood on a granite plinth, still shrouded in a massive white cloth. Karen stood at the back of the crowd, a spectator. She saw the mayor speak, she saw a general give a speech, but she barely heard them. Then, Alex was invited to the podium. He spoke briefly, not about his art, but about the spirit of service. This piece isn't about the glory of war, he said, but about the indelible, vibrant life that veterans fight to protect. It's inspired by the courage and the irrepressible spirit of men and women like Captain Robert Sterling. With a tug of a rope, the cloth fell away. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The sculpture soared into the blue sky, the burnished metals catching the sun, alive with energy and motion. It was a whirlwind of joy, a testament to a life lived fiercely and fully. It was perfect. Tears streamed freely down Karen's face, but for the first time, they were not tears of grief, but of gratitude and pride. Later, as the crowd thinned, Alex found her standing before the statue. What do you think? He asked. I think, she said, her voice thick with emotion, that he would have absolutely loved it, and he would have told you it needed more cowbell. Alex laughed, a real hearty laugh. Thank you, Karen. No, she said, looking from the sculpture to his face. Thank you. In the weeks that followed, a new, quieter harmony settled over the creek. The memorial garden in Alex's yard was now just the sunken garden, and Karen found she quite liked the splash of color. Most of the flamingos disappeared, their satirical mission accomplished. She and Alex would exchange friendly waves, a quiet acknowledgement of the strange, painful journey they had shared. Karen even started her own garden, planting a riot of colorful non-HOA-approved perennials along her walkway. She was beginning to embrace the chaos. One sunny Saturday afternoon, as Karen was on her knees, happily digging in the dirt, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows purred to a stop at the curb. A man in a sharp, tailored Italian suit emerged. He was handsome, with silvering hair and a smile that was as polished and cold as marble. He carried a thick, black leather binder. He strode towards her, his expensive shoes making no sound on the pavement. Karen Sterling, he asked. His voice was smooth, like expensive whiskey. Yes. Jonathan Croft, he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm and brief. I'm the new regional director for the Aegis Group. We're a private equity firm. You may not have seen the notice yet, but last month we acquired Consolidated HOA Management, the company that oversees Harmony Creek. Karen felt a familiar, cold prickle of dread on the back of her neck. I'm here to introduce myself to key residents, Croft continued, his smile never wavering. My team and I have been conducting a full audit of the association's assets and compliance records. Frankly, he said, flipping open his binder, things have grown lax. We've identified numerous infractions that are negatively impacting property values, which is a direct threat to our investors' interests. He turned the binder so she could see. The page was a high-resolution satellite photograph of the neighborhood. Dozens of properties were marked with sharp, red circles. She saw a red circle around the Flamingo lawyer's house. She saw one around the house with the rainbow welcome mat. And she saw a large, angry red circle drawn squarely around Alex Ivanov's sunken garden. "We'll be instituting a new, streamlined enforcement protocol," Croft said, his voice dripping with corporate euphemism, zero tolerance. "It's the only way to protect the integrity of the community and guarantee maximum return on investment." Karen slowly rose to her feet, wiping the dirt from her hands onto her jeans. She looked at Jonathan Croft, at his predatory smile, and his binder full of violations. She looked across the street at Alex's house, where the vibrant, chaotic garden stood as a monument to hard-won peace. She then looked down at her own small, defiant patch of colorful flowers. The war was over, but a new battle was about to begin. The enemy was no longer a free-spirited neighbor. It was a faceless, soulless corporation, armed with bylaws and a lust for profit. And as she stared into the cold eyes of Jonathan Croft, Karen Sterling felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not anger, not grief, but a slow, burning, and dangerously focused sense of purpose. Harmony Creek had a new dragon, and it had no idea that it had just moved in across the street from the one woman in the world who knew exactly how to fight it.